morning, everybody. I'm Barry Whitley, Director of Solutions Engineering here at CacheFly, and I'm joined today by Matt Levine, who is our founder and CTO. What are the challenges that you've had as a tech leader, as a CTO, and what have you learned over the years that have helped you kind of lead the team in a remote basis?
It's definitely a brave new COVID world right now. We've been remote for basically our entire life as a business. So we've suffered already through some of the pain points that people are currently experiencing. I think the biggest thing I'm talking to other leaders about right now is just streamlining communication. The big challenge that I think happens to everybody, especially if you were used to working in an office environment and now you've switched to remote, is how to keep the cadence of casual conversations amongst your peers. There's really no great way to replicate walking past somebody's desk. Oh, hey, how's it going? That's the most basic form of communication in an office is casual encounter. What we found over the years is there's a lot of friction to trying to replicate that in a remote world. So even though it sounds really straightforward and easy to say, oh, hey, we're a remote company, everybody should, make an effort to go out and just have a quick video call with your peers. In reality, in the physical world, that's walk by somebody's desk and be like, hey, how was your weekend? In the remote world, that's send somebody a Slack to start a Zoom, see if they're available. So we're playing with lots of technology to try and solve that. But the reality is it needs to be solved with good communication hygiene and policies. There's no perfect answer. It's something we've been struggling with since day one and we'll continue to struggle with. But I think 90% of it is thinking about it and brainstorming solutions that you might otherwise be willing to ignore. Like I talked to lots of leaders who are remote over the last 6 months and they haven't thought about it. They're just like, well, it's not as good, but that's okay. And as it turns into the long view of this, it needs to not just be okay. You actually need to have really good communication in the same way that you probably had really good communication in the office environment.
Right. And, to that end too, I mean, we've adopted several different tools too. So I don't even think it's one, it can't be just one thing, right? Even it's got to be a multitude, to give people an idea. We've got one tool that kind of replicates the whiteboarding or the scrum boards or the kind of to-do list type stuff. We've got a separate tool that, in Slack that replaces both, a lot of phone calls, a portion of the emails, and I think Slack is pretty good at doing the kind of, leaning over somebody's cubicle wall and asking them a question type communication. Obviously, there's email, which will never go away, but then we have to also introduce Zoom, playing around with some other video conferencing technologies, just, I guess the trick being that we've got at least 4 tools and that could, even potentially grow because there's little niches that we have to fill in the way that people are used to kind of operating and being social animals.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a tooling problem. I mean, tooling is something that can help, and having things that are easier to solve that friction problem is definitely a huge win. But at the same time, I sort of feel like there's nothing new under the sun. So it's not really a different problem than the LA office needing to communicate with the New York office in 1955. It's just how, it's video instead of a phone call. But at the end of the day, you still need to figure out how to do that collaboration in the form of, like I say, communication hygiene, being conscious of the fact that nobody's just going to overhear conversations. You're going to have to pull them in, or you're going to have to summarize something and push it out. Just things like that solve a huge percentage of the burdens, but it's something that you weren't necessarily conscious of when you were in person. And I want to attribute it to the folks at Basecamp, but I could be wrong. But something I read a while ago was somebody said, if you're failing your remote employees, you're also failing your local employees in ways that you don't realize. And the big example that was used was meetings. So if you're not already summarizing your meetings, which in remote is like the bare minimum, because you're working across time zones and not everybody can make every meeting. But there's organizations where that doesn't happen. And the reality is it might seem like it's something you have to do to support your remote employees.
Well, you can also probably add creating agendas or managing agendas, managing time management, all those things that I think in a traditional, I've certainly been in plenty of places before where the meetings were not handled in that way. Everybody just kind of stumbles in when they feel like it.
Yep.
And just kind of talks for somewhere between 30 minutes and 90 minutes, and nobody has any idea which one it's going to be. And everybody kind of stumbles out, and you hopefully have some to-dos, but you're not sure. And that seems to be more the norm.
That's a big part of it. I think the overall win with thinking of your remote team is the idea that, oh, if you wanted to know what happened in that meeting, you should have been in it. So, which means not only do you fail your remote employees because they weren't in it, but you fail people who are on vacation. You fail people who were off meeting with an important client. You fail people who are in other meetings. So the idea that the information lives, breathes, and dies in that conference room, that's a substantial challenge that you have to figure out how to overcome for remote. But even if you go back to some sort of hybrid environment where you have people in the office, imagine how much better it is for the people that were on vacation to get a summary of the meeting they missed, instead of just people being like, yeah, we talked about some stuff, and yeah, you should have been there. It was really good.
And you've used the term communication hygiene multiple times now, and I don't think that was a term that I'd heard until I'd gotten here. The concept seems self-explanatory, but if you want to kind of, what does that term mean to you, and what have we had to do to kind of address that?
Sure. I mean, I use it as the all-encompassing term for, what methods are you communicating? How frequently are you communicating? How well are you engaged when you're on a Zoom call or a video call? All of those things to me wrap up into hygiene, which is you need to take care of the communication. It can't just be a thing that isn't part of your daily habit and daily routine. So that's what I think of when I use the term. I don't know if that's what it means for everybody, but for us here at CacheFly, we think of it as the routines day to day that make sure that we're all doing the right thing by our teammates when we're communicating.
I think one of the things I've seen that's kind of come as a real positive from thinking about communication hygiene is, when you're talking earlier too about not being able to overhear conversations, and that's actually a really legitimately lost opportunity, because there always is. If you're in a busy office, you will pick up things kind of, even if it's learning by osmosis, from just things passing around. And I think one of the things that has been interesting about your communication hygiene process, or at least thinking about it and addressing it, is being more aware of our team sharing conversations that should involve multiple people. So instead of one-on-one emails or one-on-one private messaging, or even one-on-one Zoom calls, it's, if this is something that has application outside of just the two people involved, then go ahead and share it in a shared space where more people can absorb it. And there's always the threat of information overload, but I think for the most part it works out because people can just sift through it and pick out the stuff that matters to them, but without the risk of losing out on things that you didn't overhear because you weren't invited to a meeting, or didn't get the PM directly.
Right. And there's pros and cons, right? So there's things you can gain in that remote environment by being conscious like that. At the same time, there is nothing that really replaces being in the room with somebody. So it's a balance of both. You're relatively new to CacheFly, and so at least during the current COVID cycle, I can't see us having an offsite anywhere anytime soon. But that's also part of it, is you have your remote team, but you need to bring everybody together, get face-to-face from time to time, build those relationships, and that also makes everything else better.